before God and 300 guests. My husband turned. That smile wasn't for me. It was for her. "I never thought," he said into the microphone, his voice echoing in the church, "that she would let me go." Then, he stepped right past me and kissed my maid of honor. "My name is Alara Prescott. I am, or perhaps I was, 32 years old and the rightful heir to Prescott Capital. Today was supposed to be my wedding. The air in St. Cecilia's was heavy with the scent of thousands of white peonies and old money. Sunlight, filtered through the stained glass, painted the marble aisle in jewels. This was Boston high society at its peak, a performance of wealth and lineage. I stood at the altar, the cathedral's vaulted ceiling soaring above me, feeling the weight of my veil and the heavier weight of expectation. Beside me stood Julian Vance. At 35, he was the golden boy of Prescott Capital, my uncle's protégé, and the man I was about to bind my life to. His hand, lightly holding mine, was steady. Across from us, my cousin Chloe, my maid of honor, looked radiant. At 28, she was the charming, beautiful daughter of my uncle, Arthur Prescott. Arthur, a man of 60, sat in the front pew, his expression one of proprietary satisfaction. He was the one who had championed Julian, guided him, and, I believed, approved of this union that would solidify the company's future. The organ faded. The priest smiled. It was time for the personal vows. Julian was handed the microphone. He was always the performer, the one who could command a room. He turned, and for a fleeting second, his eyes met mine. They were blank. Then, his gaze shifted, moving past me, locking onto the woman standing at my side. His smile, when it came, was not for me. It was dazzling, intimate, and aimed directly at Chloe. "Throughout this whole preparation," Julian began, his voice amplified, filling every corner of the sacred space, "I kept thinking about one person. I waited, my own rehearsed words catching in my throat. This was not the script. Chloe." My heart stopped. Not a beat, but a full, crushing cessation of movement. "I never thought," he continued, his eyes still locked on her, a private joke shared before the world, "that you'd let me go." The air turned to ice. Before I could process the words, before I could even breathe, he dropped my hand. He stepped past me, covering the few feet to my maid of honor in 2 quick strides. He did not just step past me, he made me invisible. Then, he cupped Chloe's face in his hands and kissed her. It was not a chaste, panicked kiss. It was deep, hungry, and possessive. A kiss that spoke of a history I had been blind to, a future I was not part of. Chloe's hands, still holding her bouquet, came up to wrap around his neck. A collective gasp finally ripped through the silence. Someone in the front row dropped a glass. I heard the shatter, sharp and clear against the marble. My Uncle Arthur was the first to move. He lunged from the pew, his face a mask of purple fury, and scrambled onto the altar. He ripped the microphone from Julian's hand. "A joke!" he boomed, his voice cracking with forced joviality. A bizarre, youthful joke. These young people, always pushing the boundaries. He was looking out, not at me, but at the investors, the clients, the faces in the crowd whose confidence was the lifeblood of our firm. "Please, everyone, let's calm down." A momentary lapse in judgment. But I was not looking at him. I was looking at Julian, who was still breathing heavily, his eyes fixed on Chloe as if they were the only 2 people in the room. I stood alone at the altar, a bride abandoned in a sea of white silk. The tears I expected did not come. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity settled over me. I turned my head slowly, my veil brushing my shoulder, and looked directly at my uncle. Arthur had stopped his frantic explanations. He had seen my stare. He was no longer looking at the crowd. He was looking past me, toward the entrance of the church, and subtly, almost imperceptibly, he raised his hand and signaled, not to a groomsman, but to the two broad-shouldered men in dark suits by the door. Security. He was signaling security. At my wedding. I did not need to be told. I did not need to be dragged out. I turned my back on all of them, on Julian, on Chloe, on the man who was supposed to be my family. I did not run. I held my head high, my spine straight, and I began to walk. I walked past the stunned faces of my friends, past the whispering partners, past the clicking cameras of the society photographers. The silence that followed me down the aisle was absolute. It was a dead, hollow silence. When I reached the massive carved oak doors, I did not look back. I pushed them open myself. They closed behind me with a heavy, final thud. The sound echoed in the empty portico, the definitive, deafening sound of my entire life ending. The white Rolls-Royce was still waiting, the ribbon on the hood already limp. I climbed into the back, the heavy silk of my dress pooling on the empty seat beside me. The chauffeur, James, met my eyes in the rearview mirror. His face was pale, his professional mask shattered. He didn't ask where Julian was. He simply put the car in gear. We hadn't even turned onto the main road when my phone buzzed. It wasn't a congratulatory text. It was a cold, system-generated notification from Prescott Capital IT. System alert. Your access credentials have been revoked effective immediately. I stared at the screen. Revoked. I tapped the icon for my work email. Access denied. My calendar. Access denied. My company-issued secure drive. Access denied. My fingers felt numb, slow. This wasn't a glitch. This was an execution delivered with brutal, technological efficiency. "Take me home, James," I said. My voice sounded hollow, distant. "Home, Miss Prescott." The penthouse. The drive through Boston was a silent blur. The city looked infuriatingly normal. When we pulled up to the curb on Beacon Street, the familiar brass and marble entrance of my building offered a brief, false sense of relief. I stepped out, holding my $1,000 veil out of a puddle. I swiped my security card at the private elevator entrance. The light flashed red. Denied. I swiped it again, jamming it into the slot. Red. A small, insistent beep of rejection. Miss Prescott. Robert, the building manager, hurried out from the main lobby, his face a mask of profound professional discomfort. He was twisting his hands, unable to meet my eyes. "Robert, my card isn't working. The elevator is offline." "Yes, Miss Prescott. I am terribly sorry." He looked down at his polished shoes. "We received a directive from the asset manager about an hour ago. An hour ago, while I was standing at the altar. A directive," I repeated, the cold of the marble seeping through the thin soles of my shoes. "We were informed that you no longer reside here," he said, the words clearly memorized and painful. "The penthouse is a company asset, and your residency has been terminated, effective immediately." "My things," I whispered. "My clothes. They are being moved to a secure storage facility. Miss Prescott. We were given very specific instructions." He looked physically ill. "I am so sorry. They told me not to permit you entry." I stepped back from the door as if it had burned me. I fumbled for my phone again, my hands shaking. If my work email was gone, I opened my personal account. An email sat at the top, marked urgent. It was from my private banker at Belmont Trust. "Dear Ms. Prescott, pursuant to a formal request from the primary manager of your family assets, Mr. Arthur Prescott, all accounts associated with your name have been immediately frozen pending an investigation into suspicious activity." Suspicious activity. My breath hitched. My money. The money I'd inherited. The accounts I'd had since I was 16. It wasn't my money. Not really. It was family money. And Arthur was the manager. He had just locked me out of my own life. I dialed his number. I needed to hear his voice, to hear him explain this monstrous, impossible reality. It rang twice, then a sharp click. Voicemail. His line. The line that was never, ever busy, was closed to me. I tried again. Voicemail. A cold, acidic panic rose in my throat. I dialed Chloe. This time, it didn't even ring. A text message appeared almost instantly. "Leave us alone. Alara." I clicked it open, needing the full impact of the blow. "Leave us alone. Alara. It's what's best for the company." Best for the company. The clinical, brutal words hung in the air. I looked up from the phone. James was still idling by the curb, watching me in his mirror, a silent, helpless witness. I couldn't stay in his car. I was no longer his client. I stood on the brick sidewalk of Beacon Street. A tourist trolley rattled past, the people on it laughing, pointing at the historic buildings. I was a spectacle, a bride in a couture gown, left at the altar, now homeless. A cold drop of water hit my bare shoulder. I looked up. The gray Boston sky, which had held off for the ceremony, had finally broken. A thin, miserable rain began to fall, plastering strands of my carefully pinned hair to my cheeks and neck. No house, no money, no job. I stood there in a dress that cost more than most people's cars, and I had absolutely nothing. The realization crystallized, sharp and devastating. This was not a moment of passion. This was not Julian having a sudden, reckless change of heart. The revoked access, the frozen accounts, the security at the church, the immediate termination of my lease. This was a coup, a meticulously planned, perfectly executed corporate and personal takeover. They had been planning this for months. Every smile, every shared dinner, every discussion about flower arrangements was a lie. The rain was coming down harder, the expensive silk of my dress darkening at the hem, dragging me down. I was shivering, but not just from the cold. I had nowhere to go. Wait, that wasn't true. There was one place, one person left in this city who was not part of Arthur's world. One person he had exiled years ago, a person he truly, deeply hated. I walked back to the car. "James," I said. My voice was different. The weakness was gone. He rolled down the window, his face a picture of misery. "Take me to Cambridge," I said. "To Matilda's." The ride to Cambridge was a crossing into another world, from the manicured, old-money fortress of Beacon Hill to the quiet, intellectual streets of academia. James left me on the curb in front of a modest brick 3-story building. He looked like he wanted to say something, but I just nodded. I was no longer his problem. I was no one's problem. I walked up the 2 flights of stairs, my soaked dress, now weighing at least 50 pounds, dragging and catching on the steps. I was leaving a trail of rainwater and crushed peony petals. I stood outside apartment 3B, a plain wooden door that I had not visited in years. Arthur had made it clear that associating with that woman was a sign of disloyalty. I knocked. A moment later, the door opened. Matilda stood there, 65 years old, her short hair still defiantly gray, her eyes as sharp and analytical as I remembered. She was my godmother, my mother's former business partner, and the woman Arthur had ruthlessly exiled from Prescott Capital a decade ago, just weeks after my mother's funeral. She took in the entire scene in one sweeping glance: the ruined couture gown, the running makeup, the shivering, the utter desolation. She did not gasp. She did not rush to comfort me. She simply stepped back from the door and said, "I was wondering when you'd realize." I crossed the threshold into her small, warm apartment. It was filled with books, not art, and smelled of tea leaves and old paper. "Get out of that dress, Alara," she said, her voice not unkind but firm. "It's a costume, and the play is over." She handed me a simple gray wool robe. I fumbled with the hundreds of tiny pearl buttons on the back of the dress. my fingers clumsy and cold. Matilda, seeing my pathetic struggle, stepped in and undid them with a few efficient, decisive movements. The dress fell to the floor in a wet, heavy pool. I stepped out of it, leaving the last piece of my old life on her hardwood floor. Once I was wrapped in the robe, she sat me down at her small kitchen table. She put a kettle on the stove and moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose. The whistle of the kettle was the only sound for several minutes. She poured 2 cups of strong black tea and placed one in my shaking hands. "Drink it," she ordered. I drank. The heat was a shock. "They did not just humiliate you, Ilara," she began, sitting opposite me. "They did not just steal your fiancé. They executed a long-planned, hostile takeover." I looked up, the fog in my brain finally beginning to clear. "What do you mean? This marriage was a farce, a corporate necessity?" Matilda sipped her tea, her eyes holding mine. "Your Julian is not the financial wizard Arthur has painted him to be. He is a gambler, a reckless, arrogant fool. 6 months ago, he made an unauthorized derivatives trade. He lost. Ilara. He lost big." "How big?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer would be obscene. "Just shy of $200 million. Client money, pension funds, trust accounts, all of it, vaporized in an afternoon." I felt sick. Arthur would have fired him. He would have been ruined. "He should have been imprisoned," Matilda corrected me, her voice sharp. But Arthur couldn't let that happen. An independent audit would have revealed the loss, and the resulting scandal would have tanked the firm. So, Arthur covered it up. He used the firm's emergency reserve funds to plug the hole, an act that is, of course, highly illegal. "So the marriage," I said, connecting the cold, terrible pieces, "was to, what, keep him quiet?" "No, child," she said, leaning forward. "It was to bind him, to make him family, but more importantly, it was about you." She got up and pulled a thick bound document from a bookshelf. "Your mother's work, the Prescott Capital Charter. Evelyn was brilliant, and she did not trust your uncle." She flipped to a specific page. Section 4, Subclause B. "The position of Chief Executive Officer must be held by a blood relative of the Prescott line, or be granted with the unanimous written consent of all primary heirs." She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "You, Ilara, are the primary heir. Your mother gave you the ultimate veto. You held the keys to the kingdom, and Arthur hated you for it." The full, horrifying picture began to assemble in my mind. "By marrying you, Julian becomes family, legally nullifying your veto," Matilda explained. "He becomes eligible. But that was not enough for Arthur. He could not risk you ever challenging him. He could not risk you being on the board, a stable, competent heir, questioning his decisions. So the wedding," I said, my voice flat, dead. "The humiliation was a strategic play, a performance to destroy your credibility. To paint you as the jilted, unstable, hysterical woman, to ensure that when you were voted off the board, no one would question it. They would all nod and say, 'Poor Ilara, she finally snapped.' It would be seen as a tragedy, not a coup." I set the teacup down. It rattled in the saucer. "The ultimate goal," Matilda said, closing the book. "Arthur gets his puppet CEO in Julian, whom he now owns completely. He secures the firm for his own daughter, Chloe, and you, the true heir, the only person who could stop him. You are eliminated, disgraced, disowned, and dismissed. It was not just a betrayal. It was an assassination, and they had left me for dead. The tea in my cup was cold, but I didn't care. The numbness that had protected me was burning away, replaced by a slow, simmering rage. This wasn't just about a broken heart. This wasn't about Julian or even Chloe. This was about my mother. They had taken my mother's legacy, the company she had built from nothing, and used it as a weapon to destroy her only child. "He won't get away with it," I said, the words gravelly in my throat. Matilda watched me. Anger is good, it's focused, but Arthur is insulated. He has spent the last decade burying his tracks. You have no money, no access. In the eyes of the world, you are now officially unstable. His word against yours. He won't even have to speak. His lawyers will. My mother, I insisted. She wouldn't have just let this happen. She wouldn't have trusted him. No, Matilda agreed, a small, sad smile touching her lips. She didn't. She went to a small wooden desk by the window, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a single, old-fashioned brass key attached to a simple leather fob. The leather was worn, softened by years of use. Your mother, Evelyn, was the most careful woman I have ever known, Matilda said, placing the key in my palm. My fingers closed around the cold metal. She never, ever trusted Arthur, not fully. She respected his ambition but feared his greed, especially after you were born. What is this for? An insurance policy. She kept a private office, not a Prescott Capital property, rented under a shell corporation she established in college. It's in the Seaport District, a place Arthur would never, ever think to look. She gave me the address. It was a world away from the gleaming glass and steel tower that housed Prescott Capital's headquarters. I left Matilda's apartment just before dusk, dressed in a pair of her old gray sweatpants and a worn university sweatshirt. I must have looked like a ghost haunting the Red Line, but for the first time in 24 hours, I had a destination. The building was a relic, a holdover from the seaport's industrial past, squeezed between a luxury condo building and a high-end oyster bar. It was a 6-story brick warehouse, its windows dark and grime-covered. The lobby smelled of damp, dust, and ozone. There was no doorman, just an ancient, rattling elevator with a metal grate. I took the stairs to the 4th floor. The hallway was lit by a single, flickering fluorescent bulb. At the very end of the hall was a door marked 412. The key slid into the lock with a well-oiled click. My mother had paid the rent. On time. For 10 years after her death. I pushed the door open. The air that hit me was stagnant, thick with the smell of old paper, cold upholstery, and a decade of absolute stillness. A thick, uniform layer of gray dust covered every surface. It was a tomb. My mother's tomb. The office was just as I remembered her style, minimalist, strong but personal. A heavy mahogany desk, 2 leather visitors' chairs, shelves filled with financial journals and legal texts. Everything was exactly as it had been on the day she died from that sudden brain aneurysm. I stood in the center of the room, my heart hammering. I could almost see her sitting at the desk, her black hair pulled back, her reading glasses perched on her nose. I ran my finger along the desk. It left a clear, pale line in the gray dust. Something felt wrong. My mother was obsessively, famously neat, a place for everything and everything in its place. She hated clutter. She hated asymmetry. My eyes were drawn to the floor, an old, beautiful Persian rug, all deep reds and blues, was centered under the desk and chairs, but it was crooked, just an inch, maybe 2, but it was off-center, an oversight so glaringly out of character that it screamed at me. My mother would never, ever have left this rug askew. My pulse quickened. I dropped to my knees, the grit of the floor biting into my legs. I grabbed the thick, wool-piled edge of the rug and pulled. It was heavy, the antique furniture anchoring it. I had to shove the visitors' chairs aside, their legs dragging through the dust. I pulled again, straining, my muscles burning. The rug bunched up, revealing the dark wooden floorboards beneath. And there it was, not a large safe, but a small, dark, metal square set perfectly flush with the wood, a discreet keyhole-operated floor safe. I hadn't seen it at first. The key. I fumbled in my pocket for the desk key Matilda had given me. It was too large. I looked at the key fob again. The leather was stitched. I pinched the edge and realized it was two pieces, sewn together. I tore at the stitching with my fingernails. Frantic. Inside, pressed into the leather, was a second tiny silver key, a safe key. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit it into the lock. I turned it. A faint, mechanical snick echoed in the silent room. I lifted the small, heavy door. Inside, there was no dust. It was perfectly clean. There were no jewels, no cash, no diaries. There was only a single object, a thick, black, leather-bound ledger. I lifted it out. It was heavy, its pages filled not with printed spreadsheets, but with my mother's elegant, precise, handwritten script, columns of dates, codes, and numbers. It was a record of transactions, but at the top of the first page, in her familiar handwriting, was a title I had never seen before, a name I had never heard in all my years at the firm. The Peregrine Fund. I locked the office, the ledger hidden in a canvas tote bag I'd bought for $10 at a convenience store, and returned to Matilda's. We spread the contents on her kitchen table. I had stopped at a copy shop and made meticulous, high-resolution scans of every page, uploading them to a secure, encrypted drive and making 2 physical copies. The original ledger was now hidden in a place not even Matilda knew about. My mother's caution was a lesson I was learning too late. "It's a parallel fund," Matilda said, her finger tracing one of the columns. Her face was grim. "She's mirroring trades, using Prescott Capital's client transactions as a shield. A legitimate trade happens here." She pointed to one code. "And a nearly identical, but separate, trade happens in the Peregrine Fund." "But why?" I asked, scanning the pages. The codes were proprietary, internal. I recognized some, but others were completely alien. "Leverage. Secrecy. Your mother was tracking something. She built this to follow a trail without being seen." Matilda sat back, rubbing her temples. "But these are 10 years old. The codes are obsolete. We can't decipher what they meant without a key. We need an insider." My mind raced through the roster of senior partners. All were Arthur's men. They were either complicit or cowards. "Wait," I said. Frank Keller." Matilda raised an eyebrow. "Frank," I insisted. "He's the chief risk officer. He's been there for 30 years. My mother hired him personally. He adored her. He always told me she was the only honest person in finance. He was loyal to her. 10 years is a long time. Alara, loyalty rots when it's not fed." "I have to try," I said. "He's the only one who would have the old risk assessment keys. He can read these codes." I used a burner phone I'd bought with the last $200 in cash I had in my purse. I found Frank's personal number from an old contact list. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Frank, it's Alara Prescott." The silence on the line was heavy. I could hear his breathing. "Alara, my God, what happened? We've all been so worried." "I can't talk about that," I said, my voice cold and flat. "I need your help. It's about my mother." That got his attention. We met an hour later at a small, dark coffee shop in the North End, far from the financial district. He looked older than his 55 years. His shoulders stooped, his eyes darting nervously to the door. I didn't waste time. I slid a manila envelope across the table containing copies of the first 10 pages of the ledger. "I found this in my mother's private files. I know you were her most trusted associate. I need you to tell me what the Peregrine Fund is." He opened the envelope. His practiced, cynical face dissolved. The color drained from his cheeks. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with something I mistook for shock. It was fear. Where did you get this?" he whispered, his hand involuntarily moving to cover the pages. "Does it matter? Can you read it?" He stared at the codes, his financial brain whirring. I can't. This is impossible." He looked up, his eyes suddenly full of a convincing, watery sentiment. "Your mother, Alara, your mother was the best person I ever knew. The absolute best. Then help me. Frank, Arthur, Julian, and Chloe. They're destroying her company. This ledger is the key. He nodded, sliding the pages back into the envelope. He looked resolute. You're right. This is a betrayal of everything she built. I need to check the old mainframes. The risk archives are firewalled. I'll have to do it from my office. He looked at his watch. Give me 24 hours. Don't talk to anyone. Not a soul. Meet me here. Same time tomorrow. We'll honor her. We'll fix this. He left first. I stayed for another 10 minutes, watching the door. A small, dangerous kernel of hope had begun to sprout in my chest. He was going to help. He had seen the truth. I spent the night on Matilda's couch. The ledger pages burned into my memory. I barely slept. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Matilda shaking my shoulder. Alara, you need to see this. She wasn't holding a cup of tea. She was holding a newspaper, the Boston Globe. I didn't even need to read the words. My face, distorted and wild, was on the front page. It was a candid shot from the wedding, a moment I didn't even remember, my mouth open in what looked like a scream. The headline was a sledgehammer. Prescott heiress ousted. Ilara Prescott removed from board for erratic and disruptive behavior. My hands were shaking as I took the paper. The article, written by a journalist famously close to Arthur, was a masterpiece of character assassination. It painted me as a troubled, unstable woman, prone to fits of jealousy. It detailed my obsessive fixation on Julian and my long-standing, bitter rivalry with my cousin Chloe. The incident at the wedding was described as the tragic culmination of a long, sad mental decline. And then I saw his name, the final twisting blade. Frank Keller, the firm's longtime chief risk officer, confirmed the board's difficult decision. The article read, I had to read the quote 3 times for it to make sense. We have all been deeply concerned about Alara's mental well-being for many months. Frank was quoted as saying, We tried to get her help. Unfortunately, the public incident at her wedding confirmed our worst fears. This is a sad day, but a necessary step to protect the firm. I dropped the paper. The hope in my chest had turned to ice. He hadn't been shocked. He hadn't been afraid of Arthur. He had been afraid for himself. He hadn't needed 24 hours to check the archives. He had needed 24 hours to get to Arthur, to trade his new information that I had the ledger for his own security. He had handed my mother's legacy over to her brother for the second time. I wasn't just an outcast anymore. In the eyes of the entire world, I was now officially insane, and Arthur knew exactly what I had. Matilda threw the newspaper onto the floor in disgust. Frank Keller is a rat who just found the winning side. I'm not surprised. But this is a public execution. You're not just ousted, Alara. You're unstable. That's a legal term. It's the groundwork for having you declared incompetent. So what do? I said, the words sounding hollow. He's won. He controls the company, the press, and now the facts. No, Matilda said, her eyes sharp. He controls the insiders. Frank, the board, the partners. They all benefit from his protection. If the insiders are traitors, we go to an outsider. She paused, then looked at me with a grave intensity. Have you ever heard the name Ben Carter? I searched my memory. Carter. The Wall Street Journal reporter. The one who... Oh. Exactly, Matilda said. The one Arthur Prescott systematically destroyed 5 years ago. Ben Carter was a Pulitzer finalist. He was investigating Arthur's early expansion deals, claimed he'd found a pattern of financial misconduct. He got too close. Arthur's team framed him, beautifully. A source deposited $50,000 into his bank account, and an anonymous tip to the SEC claimed he was taking bribes to manipulate the market. He was fired, disgraced, blacklisted from every major publication. Where is he now? He runs a small, angry financial blog out of a shoebox in Jamaica Plain. He's bitter. He's broke. and he hates us. He's perfect. Finding Ben Carter's office was not hard. It was in the back of a failing strip mall, above a dry cleaner, and smelled of stale coffee and defeat. The door just said, B. Carter, Investigations, a nameplate taped to the frosted glass. I walked in without knocking. He was sitting at a desk overflowing with stacks of paper, hunched over a glowing monitor. He looked older than 42. He was thin, wired, and had the weary, hunted eyes of a man who hadn't had a good night's sleep in 5 years. He looked up, annoyed. I'm not buying whatever you're selling. Mr. Carter, my name is Alara. He shot up from his chair. The hostility was instant, a physical wave that hit me from across the room. Prescott, you've got to be kidding me. A Prescott, in my office. He let out a short, barking laugh that was devoid of humor. What? Did you run out of careers to ruin? Or are you here to finish the job? My reputation isn't enough. You want my crappy little office, too. I'm not here as a Prescott, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. They took that name from me, along with my home, my money, and my sanity, according to the Boston Globe. I walked to his desk and threw down the manila envelope with my last copy of the ledger pages. I have no money to pay you, I said. I have no reputation to lend you. I am the unstable heiress on the front page of every paper in this city. I have nothing left in the world, except this. He stared at the envelope, then at me, his eyes filled with contempt. I don't care about your pathetic little family drama. Princess, get out. He pushed the envelope back toward me. Just look at the title, I said. With an exasperated sigh, he ripped it open, spilling the pages across his desk. He glanced at them, dismissive. So what a ledger. And then he froze. His eyes, which had been so dead, were suddenly electric. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the elegant, handwritten script on the top line. The Peregrine Fund, he whispered. He looked up at me, all the mockery gone, replaced by a terrifying, raw intensity. Where did you get this, my mother's private office? She's been dead for 10 years. I've heard this name, he said, his voice low. 5 years ago. My source in your company. He mentioned it once, said it was the dark heart of the firm. Then he disappeared. I could never find any record of it. I thought he'd made it up. He grabbed the pages, pulling me further into the tiny, cluttered office. He kicked the door shut with his foot. He was a different man. The burnout was gone. The investigator was back. For hours. We worked. He pulled up old market data, cross-referencing the dates in the ledger. This isn't just a slush fund, he muttered, tapping furiously at his keyboard. God, it's a shadow fund. He's running a dark mirror of his own company. What do you mean? He pointed to a code. This is Prescott's main client, a pension fund. On this date, they made a massive, legitimate buy-in. And this, he pointed to the ledger, is a near-identical trade in the Peregrine Fund, made 1 day earlier. He's using his clients' insider information, their own strategies, to make personal, high-risk bets before they do. With Frank's help, I said. And Julian's? Exactly. When they win, the profits are wired to offshore accounts in the Caymans. But when they lose... He paused, his face darkening. He pointed to a massive string of losses. This must be your fiancé's $200 million mistake. Matilda said Arthur covered it up using the firm's reserves. He didn't just cover it up. Ben slammed his hand on the desk. He transferred it. He's using complex accounting, burying the losses in administrative fees and asset depreciation across his clients' accounts. He's making the pension funds, the retirement accounts, the people he's supposed to protect. He's making them pay for his private losses, siphoning their money, a few cents on the dollar at a time, so they don't even notice. They just see their returns are a little lower this quarter. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just a cover-up. It wasn't just gambling. It's a criminal enterprise, I whispered. He's stealing from thousands of people. Ben looked at me, a wild, triumphant, and terrifying light in his eyes. "This isn't just fraud, Ilara. This is the single biggest financial crime in this city's history, and you just brought me the goddamn roadmap." Ben's energy, which had been a burning flame, suddenly cooled. He sat back, the fire in his eyes turning to the cold, hard light of pragmatism. "This is incredible," he said, tapping the pages. "But it's a history book. Every single entry is over 10 years old, from before your mother's death." "It proves the methodology," I argued, my voice thin. "It shows he's capable." "It proves nothing about the present." Ben cut me off, his voice flat. "Arthur will laugh this off. He'll say it was your mother's personal project, a what-if scenario she was toying with. He'll say he found it, was horrified, and shut it down the day she died, out of respect for her memory. He'll paint himself as the hero. Frank's testimony already backs this up. He's insulated. We have a 10-year-old roadmap to a crime, but we have zero proof the crime is still happening." He was right. The hope that had flared so brightly guttered and died. We were checkmated. Arthur wasn't just a criminal, he was a brilliant one. He had spent a decade building a fortress around himself. "So we have nothing," I said, the words tasting like ash. "We have a motive," Ben said. "We have a methodology. We just don't have the now. We need a current transaction, a leak, something." I left his office and walked back to Matilda's in a daze. Every path was a dead end. Every person I had trusted was a traitor. Every piece of evidence was just old enough to be dismissed. Arthur, Julian, and Chloe were celebrating their new empire, while I was a ghost in borrowed clothes, fighting a war that had ended a decade ago. I collapsed onto Matilda's couch, the burner phone feeling heavy in my hand. I had no one to call, no one to text. Out of a morbid, self-destructive impulse, I opened the web browser. I needed to see it. I needed to see how the world was celebrating my execution. It didn't take long. I didn't even have to search. The top trending item on Boston Magazine's Society page was a first look gallery. The headline was bright, celebratory, and utterly obscene. A new beginning for Prescott Capital. I clicked. The first image was a high-gloss professional photograph. It was from an impromptu celebration party at the firm's headquarters last night. While I was cowering in Frank's coffee shop, there they were, Julian, my fiancé, my husband of -2 days, holding a flute of champagne. He was in a perfectly tailored suit, his arm possessively around Chloe's waist. He had been named interim CEO. Chloe, my cousin, my maid of honor, was beaming at him, her glass raised. They were the new king and queen, anointed and triumphant. I stared at the picture, the bile rising in my throat. I saw their smug faces, their confident smiles. They were not just a couple, they were a merger. But I wasn't looking at their faces. Not really. My eyes snagged on something. A detail. A dark green spark against the black of Chloe's celebratory dress. My blood turned to ice. It was impossible. I zoomed in, my fingers shaking, the image pixelating slightly. It was a necklace, a very specific, unmistakable necklace. A massive, square-cut emerald, deep as a forest, set in a heavy, antique gold bezel. The heart of Prescott. My mother's necklace. It was her signature piece. She had it custom-made. She never, ever took it off. It was her armor, her symbol. I hadn't seen it in 10 years. I had been told, in the cold, sterile hallway of Massachusetts General, that it had been lost. That in the chaos of the ER, in the frantic attempts to save her, it had vanished. A nurse, with pitying eyes, had told my uncle it was irretrievably lost. I had always assumed a desperate orderly had stolen it. And now, here it was, on Chloe's neck, worn like a trophy, a memory, cold and sharp as a shard of glass, pierced the fog in my brain, 10 years ago. The night of the aneurysm, my mother had called me, her voice slurring slightly, complaining of a blinding headache. I was in New York, on a college internship. I had panicked. She had said, "Don't worry, darling. I'm at the office. Julian is here. He'll drive me." Julian. Not a partner. Not an executive. A 25-year-old intern. Just a kid, eager to please. He had been working late. He was the one who volunteered to drive my mother, Evelyn Prescott, to the hospital. And I remembered something else. I remembered the phone call from Arthur the next day. "I'm at the hospital with Chloe," he'd said, his voice thick with false grief. She was with Julian. She wanted to be here for support. Chloe, a 19-year-old girl, there for support, in the middle of the night. They were there, both of them. They were the last people to see my mother coherent. They were in the car. They were at the hospital. And the necklace my mother never removed, the necklace that was lost the night she died, was now, 10 years later, hanging around the throat of her successor. This wasn't just a theft. This was a souvenir. And the sudden, horrifying realization that hit me was not about fraud. It was about something so much worse. I didn't call Ben. I just ran. I ran from Matilda's apartment, a dark, primal scream trapped in my chest, and I ran all the way to the seaport. They didn't just take it, I was whispering to myself, the words a frantic, breathless prayer. They didn't just find it, they took it. They were there. I was still fumbling with the keys when Ben Carter caught up with me in the fourth-floor hallway. He must have followed me from Matilda's. "Ilara, wait!" he panted, grabbing my arm. "What's going on? What did you see?" "Chloe," I gasped, finally shoving the door open into the dark, dusty office. "She has my mother's necklace, the one that was lost at the hospital." "A necklace," Ben said, following me in. "Ilara, that's not proof of—" "They were there." "Ben," I screamed, the sound echoing in the tomb-like room. Julian and Chloe. They were the last ones with her. I was frantic. I pulled the rug back, my hands raw. The safe was empty, just as I'd left it. "It's not enough," I said, pulling at my hair. "The ledger isn't enough. Then what else is there?" I began to tear the office apart. I was a whirlwind of grief and rage, pulling my mother's books from the shelves, throwing them to the dusty floor. I ran my hands under the heavy desk. I tore the cushions from the chairs. There has to be something else. She was a careful woman. Matilda said so. She wouldn't just have a ledger. "Ilara, stop, think." Ben grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to be still. "Your mother was a systems person, a strategist. She wouldn't hide things randomly. She'd build a system, the ledger, the safe." "What else did you notice?" I tried to breathe, to quiet the roaring in my head. I looked around the room, trying to see it through her eyes. The desk, the shelves, the rug. "It was the rug," I said. "It was out of place." Ben's eyes scanned the room, not as a son, but as an investigator. He was looking for things that were out of place. "The desk," he said. "The chairs, the rug. It's all analog, old world. But your mother was a modern financier. Where's the technology?" I pointed to the wall. She had a terminal, a link to the main server, but the port, it's been disconnected for 10 years. Ben walked over to it. He knelt, his face close to the wall. He saw the empty modern data port, but then his eyes moved, following a wire I had never noticed, a thin, black cable that was tucked behind the baseboard. It wasn't plugged into the main port. It was plugged into a simple, unassuming power outlet near the floor. "What is this?" he muttered. He pulled on the cable. It was taut, running into the wall. He looked at the wall panel that housed the data ports. It was a standard, beige plastic plate. "Get me something to pry this," he said. I ran to the desk and pulled out a heavy letter opener, a gift I'd given her. Ben jammed it under the edge of the plastic plate and leveraged it. The old plastic groaned, then snapped. The plate came away, revealing the dark, hollow space of the wall behind it. It wasn't just wires. Tucked inside, mounted on a custom-built bracket, was a small, black box, a hard drive, a private backup server, a single. Green LED was still blinking, a tiny digital heartbeat in the dark. It was plugged into a power line that ran down to the outlet, a direct electrical feed that bypassed the office's main systems. "My God," Ben whispered. "It's a hot backup. It's been running on its own power supply for a decade." She was mirroring everything. He unzipped his laptop bag, his movements now fast, precise. He pulled out a tangle of cables. She had her own server. She was backing up her files, but not just her files. She was backing up her communications. He found the right cable and plugged his laptop directly into the drive. The screen lit up. A simple, password-protected prompt appeared. "Damn it," he said. "We're locked out." I stared at the screen. My mother's system. "Try Peregrine," I said. He typed it. "Access denied. Try. I don't know." I looked at the desk, at the empty space where she would have sat. What was the one thing that mattered? The one thing she was trying to protect? "Try my name," I whispered. "ELARA." He typed it. The prompt vanished. A file directory flooded the screen. The folders were organized by date, but there was another, separate directory labeled Internal. Ben clicked it. It was full of files, deleted emails, voice memos, cached server data, all pulled from the Prescott Capital mainframe. My mother had been systematically archiving the company's secrets. "Here," Ben said, his voice tense. He clicked on a file dated the week before her death. "It's a draft, an email to the SEC." I read it over his shoulder. It was a formal whistleblower complaint. My mother, Evelyn Prescott, was laying it all out. The discovery of the Peregrine Fund, the initial theft by her brother, Arthur, the pattern of financial malfeasance. She had scheduled a call. The call was for 10 a.m., the morning after she died. She confronted him, I whispered, my whole body shaking. She must have told Arthur she was going to expose him. "Wait," Ben said. "There's more." He scrolled down. There were more emails, all from that final 24-hour period. Communications between Arthur and Frank, Arthur and other board members. And then, one final email. It was from an intern account, Julian Vance, sent not to the entire board, but only to one recipient, Arthur Prescott. The subject line was blank. The body of the text was short, cold, and composed. I read the words, and the floor fell away. "Uncle, she won't listen. She's on her way to the hospital, says she has a splitting headache, but she's still threatening to call the SEC from there. I was in her purse. I swapped her blood pressure medication with the beta blockers Chloe took from your cabinet. Her doctor said her pressure was high. This combination, it will look just like a natural aneurysm. She won't be making that call." I didn't throw up. I didn't cry. The capacity for that kind of human response had been scoured out of me. The dusty, silent office had become a mausoleum, and I had just read the confession of my mother's murderers. Ben was the one who spoke first, his voice a low, cold monotone. "This is not fraud. This is a homicide investigation." He carefully copied the entire drive, a process that took an agonizing 30 minutes. We walked out of that building, leaving the dust and the blinking green light behind, and re-entered a world that was suddenly, horrifyingly, a lie. We didn't go back to Matilda's. We went to a secure, anonymous hotel room paid for with Ben's credit card. "We can't go to Boston PD," he said, pacing the small room. "Arthur has spent 2 decades putting his men in key positions. The commissioner is his golf buddy. This evidence, it'll get lost. It'll get corrupted." "So, what do we do?" I asked. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, my mother's murder confession burning in my memory. "The U.S. Attorney, the SEC. No," Ben said. "We go federal. We go to the one office he can't control." It took 2 days to get the meeting. Ben had a contact, a former colleague now in the FBI's press office, who owed him a major favor. We met 2 agents from the white-collar crime and public corruption unit in a sterile conference room. They were polite, skeptical, and unmoved by the names Prescott and Vance. Then, we played the audio files. We showed them the ledger, and then we showed them Julian's email. The atmosphere in the room changed. The polite skepticism vanished, replaced by a cold, lethal focus. "This is," one agent, a woman named Diaz, said, "the strongest evidence for a premeditated, financially motivated homicide I have seen in my career." "But it's digital," the other agent added. "It's 10 years old. Their lawyers will argue it's fabricated. They'll say you, Ms. Prescott, are a disgruntled, unstable heiress, and Mr. Carter is a disgraced reporter, and you faked this to get revenge." "The newspaper article," I whispered, feeling the trap tighten. "It was all premeditated. Frank set the narrative. I'm unstable." "Exactly," Agent Diaz said. "The evidence is powerful, but it's circumstantial. We can't arrest them based on this alone. We need something more. We need to catch them in the act of covering it up. We need a live confession. We need one of them to make a stupid, careless mistake." "They don't make stupid mistakes," I said bitterly. "They will," Ben said, a dark look in his eyes. He was looking at his phone. "They're about to. Their coronation is tonight." He showed me the screen. An invitation to the Prescott Capital Annual Investor Gala, held in a moment of supreme poetic arrogance at the Boston Public Library. "This is it," Ben said. "This is Julian and Chloe's official debut as the new power couple." A plan began to form, cold and precise, like one of my mother's trade strategies. "They're feeling invincible," I said. "They've beaten me. They've stolen the company. They've gotten away with murder. They're arrogant. And Chloe is the weak link. She's not a sociopath like Julian. She's just a weak, vain, greedy child." "What are you proposing?" Agent Diaz asked, leaning forward. "You said you need a live confession," I said. "Let's make one." The plan was set. Ben, using his old press credentials, got a list of the service staff. He found a young waiter working the event, a kid drowning in student debt, and offered him $5,000 to wear an earpiece and keep his phone on a live video call all night. He would be our eyes and ears. Agent Diaz and her partner, along with 3 other undercover agents, would be among the guests, posing as new high-value investors from a New York fund. At 7 p.m., as the first guests were arriving, I sat in the hotel room, a new burner phone in my hand. I sent an email from an anonymous, encrypted account. I sent it to Chloe's personal address, not her work one. It contained a single attachment, an MP3 file. It was a voice memo. My mother's voice, pulled from the server. It was a message she'd left for her assistant, recorded just hours before she died. Her voice was strong, clear, full of life. "I'm on my way to the hospital. Just a precaution. Julian is driving me. Tell Arthur I'll see him at the 9 a.m. meeting tomorrow, and God help him when I do." I let her wait 2 minutes. Then, I sent a single text message. "I know what you did with her medicine." On Ben's laptop, the video feed from the waiter's phone crackled to life. We saw the grand hall of the library, the soaring arches, the tables draped in Prescott blue. We saw Chloe, resplendent in a red gown, my mother's emerald blazing at her throat. She was laughing, holding Julian's hand. Then she looked down at her phone. The waiter, on Ben's instruction, moved closer, offering her champagne. We saw her face. The smile froze. The color drained from it. She looked at the text message, then frantically played the audio, holding the phone to her ear. She stumbled, her hand going to the emerald. "Chloe." "What is it?" Julian said, his back to our camera. She didn't answer. She was gasping for air. Her eyes, wide with pure, unadulterated terror, scanned the crowd. She was looking for me. "She's panicking," Ben whispered. "Good." I replied. Chloe didn't go to Arthur, who was holding court by the stage. She grabbed Julian's arm, her fingers digging into his tuxedo. "We have to talk," she hissed, her voice just barely caught by the waiter's phone. "Now, in the vault." She wasn't afraid of Arthur. She was afraid of Julian. She was afraid the man who had helped her commit a crime would now use her as the scapegoat. "The trap is set," Ben said. Agent Diaz, across the room, subtly tapped her earpiece. The prey was panicked, and it was running right where we wanted it to. The grand hall of the Boston Public Library was breathtaking, a monument to civilization, knowledge, and order. Tonight, it was also a stage for the greatest lie in the city's history. Hundreds of guests, the financial and political elite of Boston, mingled under the soaring, vaulted ceilings, sipping champagne and celebrating the bright future of Prescott Capital. On the main landing, a stage had been erected. Arthur stood at the podium, bathed in a warm, respectful light. Julian and Chloe stood beside him, a perfect, glowing couple. Chloe's hand was gripping Julian's arm, her knuckles white. She was smiling, but her eyes were wild, darting, and she had not stopped drinking since the moment she arrived. "It is about a legacy," Arthur was saying, his voice resonating with false sincerity and practiced gravitas. "It is about family. It is about trust, the trust you place in us, and the trust we place in the future." He gestured to Julian and Chloe. "And I am so proud to entrust this legacy to the next generation, who will lead this firm with the same values we have always." His words were cut off by the sound of the main doors opening. It wasn't a loud sound, but in the hush of the speech, it was definitive. A collective sigh passed through the crowd as heads turned. I walked in. I was not wearing a gown. I was wearing a black, custom-tailored Tom Ford pantsuit, sharp, severe, and an exact replica of the one my mother always wore for her most important meetings. I was her ghost, come back to collect. I walked down the center of the grand hall, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The sound was like a metronome, counting down the last seconds of their lives. "Stop her!" I heard Arthur hiss into the microphone, his composure cracking for just a second. 2 security guards, the same men from the church, moved to intercept me. But before they could reach me, Chloe broke. She had seen me, and the sight of me, dressed in my mother's armor, shattered her, drunk, terrified, and cornered. She let out a piercing shriek. "Julian, make her stop! Tell her to shut up! Tell her to stop looking at me!" The room fell into a deathly silence. The investors, the clients, all of them, just stared. Julian grabbed her arm, his face a mask of cold fury. "Shut up, Chloe," he whispered, a sharp, violent hiss that was terrifyingly audible in the sudden quiet. "You are ruining everything." I didn't need to go to the stage. I stopped right at the foot, in the center of the room, so that everyone could see. The security guards froze, unsure what to do. I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I just looked up, past Julian, past Arthur, and I locked my eyes on Chloe. I spoke in a clear, cold, conversational tone, and the library's perfect acoustics carried my voice to every corner. "Did you take the necklace before or after Julian swapped my mother's pills?" The sound that came out of Chloe was not human. It was a raw, guttural wail of a soul tearing apart. She ripped herself free from Julian's grasp, her eyes rolling, the emerald at her throat swinging wildly. "No." She screamed, hysterically, at Julian. "You told me it was a sedative. You told me it would just make her sleep. You didn't say it would kill her. You didn't say it would kill her." A profound, absolute stillness seized the room. It was the silence of a vacuum, the silence of a world ending. Julian, his face the color of wet ash, lunged for the microphone. "She's insane. She's lying. She's the unstable one. We all know it. It was Arthur's idea. He made me do it. He said it was the only way to save the firm. He planned it. You little bastard, Arthur roared, abandoning the podium and leaping toward Julian. But he was too late. From the crowd, Agent Diaz and her partner stepped forward, their badges appearing in their hands. Arthur Prescott, Julian Vance, Chloe Prescott. Diaz's voice was calm, clinical, and cut through the chaos like a knife. You are all under arrest for federal securities fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. The other undercover agents, my new investors, moved in, flanking them, their movements efficient, practiced. Julian crumpled. Chloe was just sobbing, a pathetic, broken heap on the stage. Arthur looked at me, through the handcuffs, through the flashing cameras of the guests' phones, through the ruins of his life. He stared at me. He looked at me as if he couldn't understand how a dead person had defeated him. I just stared back, my face blank. I watched them all. I watched them cuff my uncle, my cousin, and the man I was supposed to marry, and lead them one by one off the stage, past the stunned, horrified faces of their world. I stood there for a long time, watching them go. In my pocket, my fingers found the cold brass key to my mother's office. The game was over. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you want to hear more, make sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give us a boost by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.